Hi guys, welcome back to the channel for another video and to the podcast. You're either going to be listening to this one or watching it, maybe even both. Variety is great. The reason I'm sharing this across all my platforms is because it is such a valuable chat and I really want to make that as accessible to as many as possible when we're having discussions like this. So today I'm joined by Harry from Team ForNever Lean. He is a content creator here on YouTube and over on Instagram. Harry is a trained PT. He also has a master's in psychology. And what Harry is doing here on YouTube is something I have never seen before. I'm sure he's going to blow up, and therefore I entrapped him before that happens, and now I have him on record talking to me before that happens. You got to know how to do it. You got to know how to play the game. The thing which drew my attention to his content, which I think is so incredibly helpful to people, is he will take the programs which are created and marketed by fitness influencers and go through it methodically and technically to unpack how valuable the program is, whether it's safe, whether or not it is actually worth your money and your time, but always through the lens of making fitness accessible to people. There is so much exclusive messaging in fitness, much like my chat with Shelley Lask. People like Harry and Shelley making movement accessible to people and breaking through the marketing and the messaging, which is really telling people that fitness and movement are all about aesthetics and six packs, and that you can't find an inroad to make it work for you. I think that they're doing such valuable work, but particularly, as we all know around here, I take issue with people who are unqualified and potentially hurting their audience by promoting and selling products which are poorly researched or poorly marketed. That's how Harry and I connected, was we had a similar thing to say about a similar creator, Sarah Stone, and just saw such an opportunity to unpack overall how to navigate fitness spaces online, how to identify red flags, how to make sure that our relationship with movement isn't being impacted by that kind of messaging, and obviously talking about the importance of qualifications, etc. And I personally learnt so much. I know that you guys will as well. So please go and show Harry some support across all of his platforms and make sure you go and watch his YouTube channel. It is not often that I will recommend people for you guys to go and watch or listen to who are kind of outside of the eating disorder recovery space, because it can be a little bit of like a minefield. But Harry is empathetic, compassionate, considerate, and incredibly responsible in the way that he talks about his content. So enjoy the chat with Harry. So Harry, thank you so much for being with us today. Obviously, I've given people a little bit of background about how we've crossed paths and your platforms where you're doing such fantastic work. So can you tell us a little bit about you, what you do, and your brilliant content that you're producing on YouTube and across Instagram, etc.?
This is always like the worst question, that kind of awkward introduction about yourself, because you never really know what to say.
It's like when people ask you, what's your most embarrassing memory? And you're like, right now, when I can't think of anything.
Literally, my life is an embarrassment. How do I choose? I'm trying to think. Okay, about me. Hi, obviously I'm Harry. I do things on the YouTube and things on the line, apparently. I've got a background. I've got a master's degree in psychology, MSc, which probably explains like some of like the mental health shift in my content. I've been a qualified PT for nearly 10 years. I think it's 10 years this year. And I'm also a heart rate variability analyst in, like, I guess my job side of things. I volunteer for a suicide prevention charity, and ultimately I think my primary shift, I guess my primary desire at the moment is to try and take my content creation further than the other kind of avenues of, I guess, career paths at this stage. And that's ultimately me. I like dogs. And that's probably the key there, is I like dogs.
Fantastic personal note at the end. So that's really interesting to see sort of the way that all of those very different interests have kind of merged into the content creation side of things. Everything's kind of lending to each other, because what I love so much about your content is that, unlike other fitness sort of inspired content, or contents around fitness, is that there is that mental health element to it as well, and there's a really compassionate, empathetic approach, which is so different from mainstream diet culture, punitive, black and white, good or bad, punishing kind of approach. So what is your personal philosophy when it comes to fitness, whether it's your own journey or what inspires you to speak about fitness in the way that you do?
I think ultimately, like, I remember years ago, I was watching Mark Lobliner speak about fitness and stuff. And I think my relationship with fitness used to be quite unhealthy at the time. And I think my relationship with kind of all aspects of fitness, be that the training, the food and whatnot, was really quite unhealthy. In the sense that I'd like actively sacrifice doing things I shouldn't sacrifice to go to the gym. And by that I mean, like, some of the things were quite, like, I don't say like drastic, but even things like an old school friend of mine passed away, and instead of going to his memorial, I was like, well, I can't miss a day at the gym, so I've got to go to that.
Yeah.
So I went to the gym, and same like food. When I had a girlfriend many years ago, I did the same sort of things. Like, I wouldn't go for certain meals, even though I loved going for those meals, but if the calories weren't high enough, I couldn't go because it meant I had to eat more, all this stuff. And then I remember him saying something a lot, Mark saying something like, fitness is meant to enhance your life, not hinder it.
Yeah.
And then it kind of resonated with me that although I love going to the gym, and I do still go to the gym, obviously, like 5 days a week, and I don't often miss sessions, it's also coming in terms of the fact that if you do miss a session, it's really not that deep. Like, it's not the end of the world. And when I was younger, I kind of felt like it was. And I had this kind of like idea that I was pursuing like the next big thing. I wanted to be Mr. Olympia or something like that, without understanding a lot of other considerations that I didn't account for, and that probably was never going to happen. And I think that kind of quote resonated with me, so that kind of probably shifts into what my philosophy of fitness is, because I think a lot of people don't really, I think, fully understand or appreciate the importance of balance. And I think a lot of people also don't consider that having a healthy social life also comes into health and fitness. Do you mean, I think too many people focus on fitness being physical health, essentially how you look. Like, if you're deemed to be aesthetic by the majority, you are fitness, you are health. But there's a lot more to that. And I think the enhancing your life versus hinder your life also comes into like the mental health side of things, etc., etc. If you're going to the gym and you hate how you look, and you go to the gym and you just hate being there because you have so much like societal pressure to be there, you're not there because you want to be there. So is that really making you happy? Is that really enhancing your life, or is that actually hindering it?
Absolutely.
So it's kind of like stemming from that.
Yeah. And it's the health component too, when clients of mine will say, because I work as an eating disorder recovery coach, so obsessive movement and compulsive movement can be a big feature of that. And they'll say, but Mia, what if I don't go to the gym as much and I'm unhealthy? And it's, well, if you're doing something in pursuit of, it makes you anxious if you don't do it. If I don't go to the gym, I'm going to be too stressed and anxious. Well, what do you think that does to the body? Stress is one of the worst things that we can put our bodies through. So if your engagement with exercise is causing you stress, it's kind of working against itself, whatever the health implications might be.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. I think it stems into like so many aspects of life. Is someone like, oh, I really like doing this, but it makes me so anxious. It makes me so stressed. It's like, do you like doing that then? Like, do you actually like that, or do you feel like you need to like that because you've got this like pressure from friends, family, online, wherever it may be, to like something? Do you actually like something? If those people didn't exist and it was purely focusing on like what you wanted to do, would you choose to do this for you?
Yes.
And a lot of times they're like, oh, I don't know really. So, well, hesitation probably answers the question.
Completely. And, we get so far away from what movement is essentially meant to be, which is, as you've touched on, enjoyment. And I'll get people to rank for me, what is their enjoyment level after engaging with movement? And they're like, oh, you mean, how tired I am, or how exhausted I feel, or how proud I am of how far I went. I'm like, no, like, enjoyment, like you do everything else that for enjoyment, whether or not you enjoyed a movie, right? It's a 10 would be, this was great, I feel really connected, I feel calm, I feel like this is really reflective of my values, I feel like I've done something good for myself, my mind is quiet. Like, oh no, that's not how I think about exercise.
I think a lot of people kind of expect or have normalized exercise as almost like a punishment. Like, and there's also this like mentality, I see it more in men than anyone else, is that if you go to the gym, you have to go balls to the wall. You have to hate yourself. You can't talk. You can't be on your phone. You cannot socialize when you're in the gym. When you're in the gym, it's like you go to war. It's like you're not going to war. You're going to the gym. Do you know what I mean? It's really not. It's really not that deep. Like when I go to the gym,
kind of a very millennial approach. Yeah.
yeah. And I think like when I go to the gym, ultimately, it's like I've almost got like two gyms. One that I deem to be like a social gym, and one that I deem to be like almost like an anti-social gym. Like it's a great gym, and the people there are really nice, but because it's a very different environment, there's a lot less interaction. It's kind of like crack on with it, which is fantastic, especially if you're pressed for time. But it's like, well, if I want to go in and have a chat, most of my friends I've made through the gym and through just talking to people. So I go into the gym, I'll have a chat, I'll piss around, I'll have a laugh, and then to the external world, people are like, no, you're not training hard enough. It's like, imagine this, I'm actually having fun. I'm actually enjoying being here. But when I do train and do my sets, I do what needs to be done.
Yes, absolutely. And you mentioned the word balance a few times there, which is, I think a different thing in everyday land versus, online fitness land. Some of these programs, etc., love the tagline balance. When you get into the detail, it's anything but. And
oh yeah, I love it.
Some of your content is beautifully dedicated to going through methodically and looking at some of these programs by influencers, many of whom don't have qualifications, don't have a PT qualification, certainly most of them without a dietetic qualification, and there's usually some nutrition advice in there. So what motivated you to start turning your attention to that particular sort of line of programs and going in and analysing their value and whether they're dangerous or just something people shouldn't buy?
I think ultimately it probably stems from like years ago. I think like the kind of like initial step into that direction was like how content like that made me feel when I was younger, especially when I was a teenager, kind of getting into fitness. I think that was kind of the time when Instagram was really coming up. And then I was finally exposed to all these influencers that essentially became like modern day celebrities to me, because I didn't watch a lot of TV, but I did watch YouTube. And all these people were doing all these programs. I was like, you know what? That seems like a really great idea, because what he said kind of makes sense, because he said do more, so I'm going to do more. And then I did all these like wild workouts. I remember like Flex magazine had a thing like gain an inch on your arms in 3 weeks. And it's just only train arms and eat 5,000 calories.
Yeah.
And obviously when I was a 18-year-old teenager, I was there like, you know what? That's what I need. That's the workout style I need. And then also you pursue these programs that you deem to have been created by people you could trust. And then you step away from it saying, did I gain an inch on my arms? No. Did I gain a millimeter on my arms? Also, probably not. And then you start questioning, like, wow, like they said I'd do that, but I haven't. So I must be the problem. It's not the program, it's me. And I think that in terms of a lot of like social comparison ultimately contributed to a lot of like body image issues I was having. And arguably like still have, probably from back then. And then that kind of contributed to a lot of like mental health, I don't say like hindrances, but definitely like limitations. And then I kind of like, without really meaning to, shifted my content to favor, well, when I was training fitness, I wish I had someone to tell me this is crap, essentially. So, I'm going to do that, but I don't want to do it in the typical like reaction commentary way where you just roast people and you slaughter them, because I don't think that achieves anything. Like, sure, sometimes it can be kind of funny. Like sometimes someone says something quite funny. I'm like, that's quite funny. But in the majority of times, I think that's just creating a barrier to entry. And especially like I fully understand who I am as like a white man. I feel like that can almost be sometimes perceived negatively, especially if my content is largely talking about women. And that's largely because 91% of the audience of the channel are women. So I was like, oh, why do you keep doing this? It's like, well, because ultimately my dominant demographic are women. So I'm going to tailor content that benefits them.
Yes.
So it's like, well, hopefully I can, in the ideal world, help more people. And then, so then I started looking at it, like, say, well, all these influencers posting all these programs, so many of them I used to buy into myself. Are they actually good? And it's not even just the programs, it's also like their content as well. And I always acknowledge and understand that if you get somebody into fitness, I really respect that. I think it's a huge thing to do, to get someone from doing nothing to doing something. You clearly have had an influence on their life, and I appreciate that. But when you look at, like, say, with the programs from people who aren't qualified, granted, qualification is a technicality. Like the actual qualification process itself is not particularly difficult. And when I was doing it, I didn't really learn a lot. And what I did learn, I've kind of almost pushed to the bin essentially, because it is kind of outdated and has been debunked. But I still think it's like a driver's license. I probably don't check my mirrors as much as I should, but you need a driver's license to drive. And I just
Yes.
prefer people to be qualified if they're going to start selling things. If you're going to give advice and stuff online, it's not the end of the world. But if you're going to start selling programs, they're like, just have something to back it up, saying, you know what, I have been qualified for X amount of years. Again, as I've seen from a lot of people, doesn't necessarily mean they are promoting good information. I think there's a big difference between the people who qualified 10 years ago and didn't update their information, the people who have qualified recently and continue to learn, which is what I think a lot of people neglect to do. So I think ultimately the shift of content just basically came from, I felt almost like, I don't want to say hard done by, but I felt disappointed with what I experienced back in the day. And I also acknowledge how it made me feel. And I don't really want other people to feel that way either. So it's like, well, okay, well, how can I analyze this from a technical perspective? Considering that not everyone's goals are going to be the same as mine, but it's like, well, what can I do? How can I essentially look at this and hopefully teach somebody something else that they can look out for in future programs without coming across as a bit of a twat, essentially, and doing so in a manner that almost, I think, like promotes being inclusive rather than exclusive, saying, you know, this is crap, don't speak to them, don't do this. It's like, well, you know what, this is okay, I appreciate this, but ultimately, if this is your goal, these are what you need to worry about, not so much the fluff stuff, etc., etc.
Yeah,
so that's probably a long-winded answer for
no, not at all. I think that it's a really important approach you take, and I think it's why your content does so well, because essentially, if we're trying to educate people who are avid followers of somebody, and I've made response videos for some time now, and I've had to figure this out myself, that if you come at it aggressively, or even just being a smart ass, people will immediately be put off by that, because there's a reason they value this person. There's a reason why they relate to them. And so they're going to, in some sense, take that a little bit personally, and you've shut them down, as opposed to coming at it from a purely educational perspective or a technical perspective. You want to be able to reach those people and maybe have them hear something that might help them analyze that content themselves, and giving people the chance to critically think about something that we are bombarded with constantly via social media, mainstream media, our peers, etc. These same old beliefs about fitness, about food, about whatever it is. And people are just not thinking critically. And I think you give them the opportunity to come at it from an empathetic, compassionate perspective.
Yeah, I think what I failed to do in the past, which is why which is what I actively say in videos, I'm not particularly proud of my older videos, is that I tried to force myself to be someone I wasn't. Because at the time I was like, you know what, because after I went solo, the kind of whole channel basically went down the pan. It went from like a pretty steady decline for 2 years, whilst kind of, I think, refinding myself. And I was almost trying to be unnecessarily negative to cause a reaction, because I thought that's what people wanted to see. And I even had people say to me like, oh, you need to be more negative in your videos, you're too positive. I was like, okay, I'm going to be more negative. But even when I tried to be negative, I couldn't be that negative. And then so I was like, you know, I can't be bothered with this. I did like a video on like Daisy Keach about a year ago nearly. And I was like, I can't bother with a negative approach. I'm just going to speak how I want to speak. And if you don't like it, then I don't care. And it did really well. And then it started to pick up, like, you know what? I think it kind of hit me is that ultimately, when a lot of women maybe see a man speaking about other women, they might have their guard up initially. Completely understandable. Like, I think I would too. So then it's like, well, I'm not helping the situation if I just promote negativity, and not necessarily hatred, but like mass resistance. So I was like, you know, let's just speak in a very inclusive manner. Let's speak in a positive manner that doesn't make anyone feel like they're doing anything wrong necessarily, but hopefully teaches them. And because that's the way I wanted to speak essentially. And let's just see how it goes. And then suddenly, like I said, people are picking up and saying, I really like how you approach this. A lot of people, like influencers I won't name, are really aggressive with this. They aren't very understanding of like gender differences and things like that. So I appreciate how you tackle this. It's like, well, ultimately, I'm not trying to isolate or target anyone in like a negative fashion. I'm just trying to, although I'm speaking about this person, that doesn't mean that other genders can't benefit from what I'm saying. So it's about kind of bringing everyone together and that inclusivity of it.
Yeah, especially when we're dealing with an area like fitness, or, you know, influencer culture, etc., it's got a very exclusive air to it. It's got to be, they are on the pedestal, they are the product, they are marketing not just their appearance, but their lives. And so it's all got to be glossy. So there's got to be a bit of like, me and you, poor plebs, please buy my program so you have a chance to get closer to this. Whereas the opposite, should be inclusive and should be something which is sort of breaking through that exclusivity. Fitness and movement are available to everyone. They don't have to be about your identity.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think a lot of people also, I think the sad reality is a lot of content creators will also market things in a manner that suggests that that's how they achieve what they've achieved, when in reality that's not necessarily true. So obviously there are considerations like genetic factors as well. So everyone's got like a genetic makeup, like a genetic shape, and you can't change your genetic structure and your shape. What you can do is build on what you have, enhance it, kind of play around with it, whatever it may be. But I think a lot of creators do kind of promote, so, well, I look like this because I do this, or very much imply that without directly saying it. And then their audience are very much disheartened and almost like put off fitness to some extent when they realize that they're doing the exact same thing. Why don't they look like this influencer? I've had a few people message me saying, I do this person's workouts, but I don't look like them. Like, what's wrong with me? There's nothing wrong with you. The fact that you
not
think
related
something's wrong
to
with
them.
you, yeah, exactly. Like, it's the fact you think something's wrong with you. That's something that needs to be addressed, because there's nothing wrong with you. It's just ultimately you just have a different deck of cards. Do you know what I mean? It's neither right or wrong. It's just different. And I think, that can be a bit of a slippery slope, unfortunately.
But I think that, you saying that, a light bulb just went off in my head, because I thought, that's the kind of training that we need to equip fitness professionals with. Because when you just said, I would hear somebody say, why don't I look like this influencer when I work out the way they do? And being able to pick up on the red flag of, what's your motivation? Can we sit and talk about that for a minute, rather than actually trying to appease the body image concern with more movement? It would be, well, let's sit down and do a check-in of your thinking and how you're approaching movement.
Yeah. Well, it's essentially, it's like, why? Like, tell me your why. Just justify it, not in like a negative perspective, but it's like, I'm curious. I think that's why I feel like a lot of fitness professionals, or maybe the personal training qualification in general, should probably delve slightly into health just beyond a physical approach. And by that, I mean maybe like a psychological approach. So understanding people better, not necessarily you need a degree in psychology. It's like, absolutely not. It's like, well, maybe you should just be taught how to understand that it's not all about like the goal. Sometimes you have to understand why. A lot of people be like, I don't care why they do it. I'm just going to I'm going to help them get to where they want to be. It's like, cool, that's fantastic. If that's your approach, fine. But I still want to understand why. I want to learn about the person. I want to kind of build a relationship with them. If they say, I want to look like this because of this, it's like, well, okay, can we shift our focus, as well as obviously considering what your training goals are, but can we also talk about, like I said, why do you want to do that? And kind of, I think, delve into the route that maybe does touch on body image hindrances, whatever it may be, that I think a lot of people maybe don't feel comfortable talking about because they're probably not qualified to talk about it.
Yeah, and at least being able to equip them with enough knowledge to intervene and say, well, actually, the issue that you're raising, you're not going to get the fix here. We might need to refer you elsewhere.
I think, sadly, when it comes to like the PT side of things, I think not everyone, but I think a lot of personal trainers, I think the caliber of personal trainer isn't very high because the qualification isn't particularly hard. It's like when you go driving on the road, how many bad drivers do you go past and you're like, how do you have a license? Do you know what I mean? The same sort of thing applies. Again, not to everyone. There are just more than I would like, unfortunately. I think they see a client as just an income. So like, I don't really care why. We're going to do it. We're going to help you get there. But I'm going to keep you there for as long as you can without any real consideration for your mental health. Because ultimately it's like, well, I'm getting X amount of pounds per hour for this. It's not my business to find out what's going on, or to almost like help you beyond the physical health side of things. It's like, well, that kind of goes into like human morals a bit. It's like, well, is that really moral of you? Is that ethical of you to do that?
Yeah.
But arguably in the PT world, they say, yeah, it is, because stay in your lane. It's like, well, it's one thing staying in your lane, but it's also another thing, I think, directly ignoring things that need to be considered and potentially accidentally or unintentionally hindering someone further by almost like feeding them down that path.
Yeah, I had a client once. Memory just floated to the surface. I had a client once who had a trainer who told her to stop telling me how much they were working out together. That was the end of that personal trainer. It became more of like a it's me or him kind of situation because they were in
That almost
active.
stems like from their insecure or the trainer's insecurities rather than anything, because
Yeah.
they're worried that you're probably going to tell them, the client, something that is probably true and something that they need to hear, but something that
Mm.
may negatively impact that personal trainer's business with that client.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's
Exactly.
yeah, I think ultimately if a personal trainer ever tries to control you to that extent, that's just a red flag. You're in the bin.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that it's so important to specify that, even though we would prefer people have qualifications, it's not just the quality of the qualification, it's the quality of the individual, right? It's like you can
Absolutely.
go to a reputable doctor or a really, dodgy doctor operating out of a van. Same qualifications, different delivery of service.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is like just because you have a qualification doesn't suddenly mean you are superior in that
Mm,
sense. It doesn't mean that you know a lot. For example, like we said with doctors, I've been to doctors. I'm there like, are you sure about that? Been to other doctors, they're like, no, 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 please don't do this.
mm,
And I'm not doubting their intelligence. I'm just stating that maybe the quality of services doesn't align with what I needed.
yeah. Totally. Just sort of linking that back to some of these programs that you provide an analysis for, etc., and the ones that are maybe on the dangerous might be too strong a word, but ones that you wouldn't recommend.
Yeah,
And the whole culture of influencers sort of pumping out these programs, etc. You have a very vocal community. You have a very active comment section, especially on those sorts of videos. What kind of feedback do you hear about the impact of programs like that, or the marketing and the messaging that we were just talking about? Like, work out like me, you'll look like me. Eat like me, you'll look like
yeah.
me. What's the overall impact of that kind of messaging and content?
I think like the sad reality is that although a lot of people may deem it just be, oh, it's just a program, I think it goes much deeper than that. I think
Mm,
the amount of comments and like personal messages I receive on Instagram that basically go into this contributed to the development of my eating disorder, this contributed to the development of my gym anxiety or depression, this contributed to my body dysmorphia, body image issues I'm having.
mm,
I think that comments like that are far more common than you might think. And again, it's not with every creator, and I fully understand that. I'm not blaming the creator themselves. I'm just saying that it could be a contributing factor, certainly. Um, but yeah, but again, it's like I know you said obviously dangerous is a strong word, but is it too strong a word? Because I think
yeah.
sometimes they can be quite dangerous. And
Mm,
again, I'm sure like obviously people benefited out. I'm sure it's not intentional. I would hope it's not intentional, but I think this is maybe the a lack of due diligence where people just don't understand the impact of what they're doing.
mm,
And that's the thing that almost upsets me the most is that they've seen like, you know what, I can make some money from this. I've got an audience of 1 million. Let's push out this program for X amounts of dollars, whatever it may be, and let's like it's a tolerable program. Do you know what I mean it gets you moving? So that's probably about the extent of its advantages. So okay, well let's just fling that off in the market. Half of the programs probably haven't even been designed by the creator in question. Some of
mm,
them being designed by a member of staff because I know that was a big scandal with a few content creators, and some of which I know of personally who basically employ people to do all the stuff, and sometimes the people aren't even qualified.
mm,
It's like, well, let's just push it into market and see what happens. It's like, well, sure, that gives you a bit of money, but do you not see what's happening to other people? And I think it's when people just kind of isolate themselves from the feedback, like creators that a creator we've shared mutual, obviously,
yes.
interest in, like stopping
Recently.
comments. Yeah, very recently,
Yes.
um, blocking comments and stopping comments. It's like, well, you know, you're doing something wrong. Just rectify it.
Mm,
So I think, yeah, I think the negative impact is far deeper than a lot of people realize, and that's when it's almost like sometimes frustrating because I do get people comment or message me saying, "You're a white man. You have no business to comment on this. This person's helping so many people." It's like, and I appreciate that she probably is helping a lot of people, and I respect that. But it's like, do you not read the comment section of the video? Like
yeah.
where I've got 13-year-old girls telling me how they went through mass eating disorder because of this, and this triggered it. 4 years later, they're still really struggling,
Mm,
and it's like, well, those are just the comments I can see. God forbid something took someone further than I think well, I guess further than anyone would ever like and anyone would ever expect, to the point of maybe inflicting harm on themselves, whatever that may be. It's like, well, they can't comment anymore. You don't know what this has done. I'm not actively saying, by the way, these influencers contributing to people taking their own lives or whatever, but I'm sure there are some people out there who have been negatively impacted to that extent. Obviously, no one ever wants anyone to suffer. No one ever wants anyone to experience an eating disorder, depression, or anxiety, whatever it may be. But it's almost like sometimes when creators push out this content, you kind of question, it's like, do you care? I'm not saying you want them to, but do you actually care if they do? And like, that's like, I read it, it makes me sad. Like, I've teared up a few times reading comments because some of these are just horrendous. I've got a Discord where I speak to a lot of other people from TFNL, and a lot of times in the mod channel, like, especially after like certain videos of certain creators went live, the comment section was horrendous. Not in like a negative way. It was very active. And again, I love and appreciate the fact that people are so supportive and active in the TFNL community. But some of the comments were awful about the development of eating disorders and things along those lines, and maybe even other hindrances. And we were just kind of like putting them in there because obviously we'd read them and wanted to share them. And you never really understand like the extent of the damage or the impact until you start seeing it happening. Like I commented from a perspective not knowing that all this was occurring, but as soon as people start opening up and showing that vulnerability and like having the bravery to share with me, which obviously I appreciate, then it kind of hits home like, oh wow, this is much deeper than I thought it was, which is almost kind of like, it almost reminds me, because obviously when you do get negative comments like you're not helping anyone, you're a bit like, oh, maybe they're right, maybe I'm not. But then you read things like this and you're like, you know what, this obviously shows that something needs to be done and someone else isn't doing it. So it's like, well, whether you think I'm helping someone or not, I like to feel I am. And if this 13-year-old woman is telling me that she has developed an eating disorder because of following this program and this kind of like diet approach that another content creators push forward, well, I feel like I have a right, and it's almost have a duty to debunk that, because the last thing I want is for another person to go down that route.
Completely. And I think that, you know, when you get those really vociferous defenders of these influencers, it kind of uncovers why it's so dangerous, because it's like a cult of personality. They can't separate the business structure from the individual.
Absolutely. I think it's hard because ultimately, like, there are always financial considerations you have to take into account, which I get, but I think a lot of people, when money gets involved, may lose their way sometimes. And when they blow up to that extent where they become like mass content creators, you're a bit like, do you not care anymore? Like, where's the care gone? Because I'm sure some of them probably cared a lot more when they were coming up into the industry, when they kind of, I think, were less consumed by success. And there's always a fear with anyone, is when they start blowing up, it's like, are you going to continue being who you are now, or are you going to turn into the person that a lot of the other creators may turn into? And that's always going to be a concern, I think.
Yeah, but don't feel too bad about the comments saying, you know, you're a white man. What right do you have? Because women get, you're tearing another woman down. You're meant to be a feminist. Like,
it's like you can't win.
You can't.
And sometimes some of the comments are actually quite funny. Like, I get some, like, I've had some horrendous DMs before, but sometimes there's like, I sometimes reply to them and be like, you know what, that was actually quite a good roast. I'd shake your hand. That was quite funny. I respect that. And they're like, yeah, I don't care. And they're like, you know what, that's okay, because I thought that was funny. So I appreciate you for messaging me. Or sometimes they're like, oh, okay, I didn't actually expect you to see this. I feel really bad.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, why would you message me if you didn't expect me to see it? I check all my DMs. Like I'm not that popular. Like, despite what my mum tells me, I'm not that popular. I promise. I mean, like, if I get a DM, they're like, what's going on? Who's doing what?
Yeah. I remember once I got, because the really out and out trolling ones are often hilarious because they're just so horrendously put together and so vicious. I got one that was, and it wasn't even talking to me, it was about me. Is it just me, or does Mia have a fake eye? One of them just looks really fake, and I couldn't help myself, and I wrote back, they're both fake. And I like dined out on that in my own head for hours, because I was so grateful for the laugh.
But give it a week and suddenly you're on Reddit exposed.
Yeah, Exactly. So given, we've sort of covered the impacts of that kind of content and just how common it is, someone could really enjoy following an individual who, puts out this kind of advice and content, etc. And, depending on how they interpret it, it can be harmless or harmful. So how should people be navigating the online fitness space in terms of following unqualified individuals with big platforms, putting out this kind of advice? What would you tell somebody about how to kind of move through that space in a way that's not going to have a negative impact?
I think that a couple of things to like focus on in there is if you're consuming content that you feel like is actively hindering you or harming you, but you feel like you need to consume it to get better, then that's probably a problem. Like if you're consuming someone's workouts or their programming, whatever it may be, and you feel crap about yourself because you feel like you're not enough or that you're the problem, that's probably a first red flag. It's like spend more time consuming content that makes you feel better about you and that you are good enough and reassures you that you're doing something, which is fantastic, rather than saying do more by this. I think another thing is going to come into like the realm of like science. Ultimately, like I think having scientific backing in science just in general speaks volumes. But then flip around, it's like if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And that's the thing that I found really hard to grasp. Is that I saw these like loads of people, content creators myself, and I'm like, you know what, this sounds unbelievable. A magic supplement to make me shredded. Wow, I believe it. I spent all my money. I used to work in a supermarket when I was a teenager. I spent my whole paycheck every month on supplements, every month. And I was like, why am I not Arnie? What's wrong with me? It's like things like that. It's like, well, do you mean if it sounds like a bit of a pipe dream, it probably is, and that's a problem. I think just because I think people need to understand that just because they're an influencer or creator has been around for years, has achieved, or their clients, whatever it may be, have achieved great results, doesn't necessarily mean that what they're preaching is like top tier information. Because ultimately, in theory, nearly anything will work to some extent, provided you do it with sufficient intensity. I give you the best program in the world, but if you do it half-assed, you're not really going to see much. I give you a pretty crappy program with excessive volume, poor exercise selection, whatever it may be. But if you do it to the provided intent or the desired intensity, then you're probably going to see something, especially if you're coming from a very inactive background. So I think it goes far beyond just looking at like testimonials and kind of results, but also just the quality of what they're preaching, and ask them if they can't justify what they're saying and why they're saying it. It's like, well, do they have a reason to be saying it? So I think my big focal points are just consuming content that makes you feel better rather than worse about yourself, and consuming content that doesn't tell you what you need to hear, but more doesn't tell you what you want to hear, but more what you need to hear, which kind of stems away from if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think that particularly with when you have enough people engaging with even a poor quality program, you're going to be able to get some good aftershots out of that to market your next program.
And you're only going to choose the good ones. And you're only going to choose the good ones. I'm not going like someone's going to send you a testimonial that says, you know what, I did this workout from this person. I felt awful. My body image went down the pan. I've actually developed an eating disorder since. I feel like this may have contributed, although I can't say for sure. They're going to be like, that's really fantastic. Okay, put that in the bin.
Yeah.
Okay, let's not do that. Like over there. But this person said they lost 3 pounds. So let's times that by 9 pounds. Well, fantastic. But put that online.
Yeah. And it reinvigorated my relationship, and, it brought me 10,000 followers, and I'm now closer to the lifestyle that's being marketed here.
Or do the old classic, like, hi, mum, quick question. Can I just borrow you for 5 minutes of time? Can you just do me a favor? Can you just write something along these lines, like jazz it up a bit and just like send it forward? Yeah. Can you? Oh, thanks, mum. You're the best.
Yeah. And a photo like with your hair covering your face so nobody can
fantastic.
check if it's a relative.
Yeah, literally. And say like, yeah, can we do that? Oh, you don't feel right? Oh, go on, just do it for me. Go on. It's my birthday. Go on. Why not? Yeah. I think, I've heard of a few creators that actually do similar things to that, unfortunately. Not just women, but a lot of, actually more of the creators I've heard do that. I think mainly because of the industry I'm more associated with, like in terms of like a personal consumption perspective, like bodybuilding. Most of the creators that I've seen do that are men, where they're, like I said earlier, they'll pay their staff to write the programs, and they'll be like, yeah, I'm taking on 100 clients. So you're taking on 100 clients. how do you have the time?
Yeah.
Like, do you mean like I program a couple of my friends for free because I want to help them, and I'm like, this takes time. I was like, how do you have 100 people? Like, either you've got some unreal time management skills or something else is occurring behind the scenes.
Quality of service can't be too high. So Harry, thank you so much for your time with us today. I think that has been such a productive chat for people to, build on their critical analysis lenses, which is so much of what I think people need to start to develop in this area, particularly because, like I said, we're kind of breathing in these toxic fitness and diet fumes all the time, not questioning. And for anybody who has any level of interest in this, whether you've, explored a fitness program that you want to look at purchasing, or you just have a general interest in movement, to absolutely go and follow Harry and his phenomenal videos, etc. Where can people come and find you?
Well, firstly, thank you very much for having me, and thank you very much for the kind words. I do appreciate that a lot. I think the best places to find me, or my preferred place, is obviously YouTube, being my channel, which is Team ForNever Lean, TFNL, or on Instagram, which is @Harry_TFNL. Those are like my primary platforms.
Lovely. Yeah, I haven't ventured into TikTok. I think it's a generational barrier. I just can't do it.
I tried, but then I also feel like I'm not good looking enough to be a TikTok dude, and I'm not dancing. I'm not dancing.
And I will never, ever, outside of like 5 wines in at a wedding, dragged onto a dance floor, there is no other context in which that happens in my life.
No chance. I went to a club years ago and my friend was like, let's go dance. I said, you know what, let's go home. I'm out. I'm not doing this. It's not for me. I don't want to embarrass myself more than I already do. It's not worth it. My mum's already disappointed.
Let's not add things to her list.
Exactly.
So Harry, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And I'm sure that we'll hopefully get the chance to ask you back to unpack some more important diet, fitness, disappointing things on the internet.
I would love that. I would love that indeed.